These two boxes of Rallyman are jam-packed with possibilities, and it's my intention to highlight all of the interesting things you can do with them. This is Shakedown. In today's Shakedown, we're going to try and entertain the crowds in the Rallyman X-Games, complete with some rules for Gymkhana style showdowns. Name a sporting event and the LA Coliseum has probably played host to it, and that includes a number of rallying adjacent events, notably for the X-Games and, when it comes to video games, the Dirt series. As an all-purpose venue, it can provide space for whatever you can think of, and it just so happens we've got another set of Rallyman rules we can test out in the form of Rallymankhana. Today we're going to have a mini X-Games with 3 events for drivers to show off some Rallymankhana rules, which are more inspirational than strictly enforceable, so let's see where we can take them. The first event is the Gymkhana. Popularised by Ken Block, it'll see drivers navigate a playground of a circuit in whatever fashion they like, aiming to score as many points as they can within 2 minutes. Whoever scores the most points wins. So, how do you score points? Well, you get points for doing anything cool, and this is our cool things list for today, which basically includes driving sideways and leaving the floor as often as we can manage. Anytime we enter a drift space, for example, we score a point. Anytime we do so at the speed limit, we score another. Some rounds we might score loads of points, but the next round we score just a couple as we head around the playground to set ourselves up for the next big points haul. After that, we'll have a couple of head-to-head Gymkhana races, which are basically 2 mirrored rally stages. We'll drive one side, our opponent the other, we'll work out who finished fastest, and then swap to do it all over again. The quickest total time for the 2 runs wins, but to keep the Gymkhana theme going, we're going to enforce an additional rule in that we must make use of all the drift and jump spaces, and failure to do so will result in a 5-second penalty per missed space. Finally, we're going to let the drivers have a good old-fashioned Rallycross race around a circuit that was used inside the LA Coliseum in 2010, back when the X-Games called Rallycross the Super Rally. Let's hope for a super showing from our drivers. We're all using the RX dashboards, and our NPC opponents are Ken Block, Tanner Faust, Brian Deegan and Steve Arpin, all run at their hardest difficulty. Luckily for us, 3 of them have the unlucky driver trait and may well pick up a fair amount of damage, but the other is Tanner Faust, who won this very Rallycross event all those years ago. Will he do so again? Here we are in the arena awaiting our Gymkhana run. I've gone through all of the NPCs before doing this. We had Steve Arpin go first, and he went around the large donut here before coming to the outside and taking a route around most of the outside of the arena. Tanner Faust was next, and he took the entire outside of the arena. He went the other direction. He went around this way, through the water hazards, around the hairpin, over the jump and all the way through, and he was trying to go for a second lap before he ran out of time. After that was Brian Deegan. He took a different route as well. He went down here to go across the jump. He then came into here for a little donut and then went around this way towards the outside. He crossed the jump and he was unlucky at the end of his turn, so he lost a brake die, and then on the very next turn while trying to go up here he lost control completely, and that was the end of his run. And finally after that was Ken Block, and Ken did an awful lot of donuts. He went around here for a large donut, and then he came in for a little donut, and then he went around the bottom as well, took the jump, took the other jump, started to come through here, but lost control on his very last turn for a slow time, but of course quite a few points. I've put focus tokens on these tiles to know which ones I have gone into for the first time or not, and we're going to score points for doing all manner of cool things. So let's get those cool things started. I am going to head into the middle of the arena, and we're going to try and score some points by hitting the speed limits. So there's a couple of Gear 2 speed limits here, and we can then get up into 3rd and boost into 5th to end our turn in 5th gear. That'll be the best course of action for us. In terms of keeping our time down, we want to go flat out. Hopefully this will not cost us. We have 2 hazards, not enough to lose control. We're on our RX dashboards. We're going to finish here in 5th gear. And we're going to count up how many points we have scored. So we have gotten 1 point for entering this tile. We've gotten a 2nd point for entering this space in Gear 2. We got a 3rd point for entering this tile, 4th point for entering that space in the speed limit, a 5th point for entering this tile, a 6th point for finishing in 5th gear, and then 2 more points for using the 2 slide spaces to get there. At the end of our first turn, we've got 8 points. It has taken us 8 seconds, so 1 point per second is pretty good. I think we can score a couple of points down here with some drifting. We need to break down to gear 3 for the speed limit, which we can easily do. We can coast through, drop to 2nd, and then coast again. We don't want to drop to 1st because there's no way of boosting out, so we are going to boost up to 4th gear and then finish our turn there in 5th gear. That will be our plan. A riskier turn than last time, but that will score us a lot of points for using the drift and slide spaces, and a couple of speed limits matched as well. So we are going to go flat out and hope for the best. No hazards whatsoever. A flawless run as we end in this slide space in 5th gear. We've scored 1 point for being in this space at the speed limit, another point for entering this sliding space, another point for entering this sliding space. We scored 2 points for this space, 1 for being at the speed limit and 1 for it being a drift. Same again on this space. We score another point for being in a slide space, another point for being in a slide space, 1 point for being in 5th gear, and we have entered this tile for the first time and take another point. Let's go up here and then back into this tile here. It's not going to score us any points for going into new territory, but it will allow us to shoot out here and come along the jumps and drift sections towards the outside of the course. We're going to coast through these 2 spaces, break down to 3rd gear to obey the speed limit. We'll coast again. We will enter in 2nd for another speed limit, and then we can boost up to 4th and finish in 5th gear once again. Same set of dice as last time. Will they roll the same set of results? We can only hope. No, they have rolled 4 hazards. So we are going to have to work out where to crash. We're still able to earn a point for obeying the gear 3 speed limit, but nothing else happens before we bump into the barriers and end our turn. We've added another 53 seconds to our total time. Not ideal to say the least. So let's start by going into 1st gear and then coasting through these tiles like this. In fact, we can swap out one of those for a gear 2 so that we can get into the correct speed for the speed limit. Scores us another point, of course. And then we can come out in 4th gear there. Not brilliant for the time, but it will allow us to break down for the 1st gear speed limit coming up. Hopefully that'll score us a fair few points and will not cost us by going flat out. Just the 1 hazard on our dice, so that's a 4th gear finish. Another 13 seconds added to our time. That has scored us 6 points, so we are going to have to do better than that if we want to challenge for the top of the leaderboards. Let's see how many points we can get from this lovely section up here, full of slide and drift spaces. Ideally, we want to be somewhere here in 5th gear. So can we manage that using all of these slide spaces? Yes, we can. We are going to need a couple of coasts as well. And our last coast will put us right on the end of that corner, ready for the jump. And we're going to have to go flat out and hope for the best as we break down hard to 1st gear and then drift and slide our way through another chunk of dice. We have rolled just the 1 hazard. It's lovely to see. Hopefully, next time we tackle a Gymkhana, we'll see much more of it. We have a jump coming up. We'd like to take that in 5th gear in order to get a couple of extra points. And that will set us up for lots of drifting and sliding. So let's do something like that. I think we should keep it simple and just end there. Let's go flat out on these 5 dice. just the one hazard on gear 5. So at the end of that, we got 8 points, and it took us 10 seconds in order to do so. What I think we should do is try to end here in 5th in the sliding space, and then try to maximize our points on the way. So we can do something like that in order to get a couple of extra points for sliding in the middle, and then a couple more for sliding at the end. This is a bit of a risk to go flat out, but we have to in order to keep our time down as much as we can to try and offset the loss of control we had earlier on in the run. Unfortunately, we have our second loss of control, so there is absolutely no way of wriggling out of this one. Once we determine the points from this turn, that will be our run done. We will definitely be over our time limit. So let's maximize the points that we have earned. After a lot of head scratching, the best turn that I could come up with was just to coast and then slow down to second gear. That will get us 4 spaces of sliding, and we've got another 2 new tiles. So that's 6 points in total, but it did cost us another 53 seconds to our time thanks to that loss of control. So our run is complete. We're going to tot up the scores and see where we fit amongst the leaderboard. We produced a lot of smoke, but it was from losing control rather than from stylish tyre squealing. We finished in a distant 5th place, but these X Games provide plenty of opportunity for a gold medal, and the next event is the Gymkhana race. We've been drawn against Steve Arpin for our race. On track before us were Tanner Faust and Ken Block. Ken lost a gear in the first turn of his first run thanks to his unlucky trait, but damage is not carried over into the second run, so he was able to keep pace, only dropping a few seconds, but ultimately finishing 22 seconds behind Faust's time of 3 minutes and 23. That meant Brian Deegan was only up against the clock, but over the course of his 2 runs, he was so unlucky that he lost basically every kind of die available to him and eventually lost control to lose some more, finishing with a total time of 4 minutes and 22. Hopefully we've had more practice at racing than we have had at showing off, and to remind you, we will need to make use of all the drift and jump spaces lest we get a 5-second time penalty per infringement. Let's take things away. Doesn't matter who goes first, so we will go first, and we're just going to plan out getting to this first corner as quickly as we can. So we can do something like that before we can't place down any more dice, and we're going to hope that going flat out is fine. Have we carried on the bad luck from our Gymkhana run? Not so far. We finish in 4th gear over here. 20 seconds on the time card, minus 7 seconds for our dice that we used, puts us in good stead at the start of this race. What can Steve Arpin do on the other track? They are mirrored as much as I could get. He's got a couple of hazards, but he can do exactly the same without crashing, so he's also going to finish in 4th gear. However, he scores time a little differently. He only gets 1 second back for his unused gear 5 die. At the end of Steve's turn, he rolls a coast die to check if he is unlucky, and on this occasion, he is not. So we are ahead of the NPCs on time so far, thanks to the way we earn seconds compared to them. But we now have to work out how to maximize our dice to get distance. And I think it's going to be something like this. Coasting, breaking down to second, and then dropping to first, boosting to third, and then coming out in 4th and 5th. And that means we use all the drifting spaces of the corner, but it also means we use all of our dice. So if we go flat out on these, it's going to be quite the risk, but hopefully it'll set ourselves up for a good time, and of course having seconds to secure dice on future turns. So let's risk this. 2 hazards on gear 3 and gear 4, so we survive. We finish in 5th gear at the bottom of the course. So what can Steve do on his second turn? He has just the one reroll on gear 1, and it doesn't do him any good. I think he can do the same as us. He's not going to put down too many dice for hazards, so he is also going to end in 5th gear. Is he unlucky? He is. Steve is going to pull a damage token at random. It is -1 coast die. We're going to coast, 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 and then brake all the way down to 2nd gear, boost up to 4th, and then finish in gear 5. However, I'm not going to go flat out on those. We're going to roll one by one and see if our luck is in. We've got 1 hazard on the coast die. Do I want to roll these heavy brake dice down to 2nd? It'll be 6 seconds for not doing so. So let's not do so. We have 6 seconds, and I think we can get time back elsewhere. So we're going to roll gear 4, that's fine, and gear 5 was a hazard, but it doesn't meet our limit. So we end here in 5th gear. It cost us 6 seconds, so we'll find a way to claw that back. As we see what Steve can do, he is 1 coast die down, and he has a slightly different arrangement of corner coming up. So he has to hit a speed limit of 1. So his turn is going to look a little different. Let's see. He spent a hazard on a coast die, and he needs to be in 4th gear to allow him to break down to 1st. And that is 2nd hazard. However, those are the only hazards that he rolled, so he is able to get up to 5th gear. Next round then, we need to break down to 3rd gear and then coast around the corner. We have another gear 3 speed limit at the end, so I think we are good to just get out of here as efficiently as we can. So I'm going to do something like that, and I am going to risk a flat out on those dice. Hopefully they won't come up hazards. Just 1 hazard on 5th gear gets us 6 seconds back. Those were the 6 that we spent earlier, and it allows us to finish in 5th gear. What can Steve do on the other side of the course? He doesn't have that coast die. Gets to re-roll a couple of gears and eliminates 1 hazard. So he can successfully break down to 3rd gear, coast through the corner using his only available coast. Once again, he has a speed limit of 1, so he's only going to be able to be in this space in 4th. He doesn't really want to end there for his time, so he wants to end there in 5th, which he can do like that. And that will get him 2 seconds back for unused dice and a 5th gear finish. Next round, we need to break down to 3rd gear at least again, and then we will coast out as much as we can. We need to be at a maximum of 4th gear for drifting. So do we do that on this turn by extending our run like that, boosting up to 4th, puts us in the middle, 1 extra space. We'll roll 1 by 1 and see how far we go. If we have to improvise a turn, then we will. We've got a hazard on the gear 3. Coasts are good. That's good. Break down to 1 is fine. 2nd gear is fine. Boost up to 4 is fine. What can Steve do? Gear 1 corner coming up. He has to be in 4th gear to allow him to break down to 1st. And then he can power out on the other side. And he's going to be able to get into 5th gear. No unused dice, but a 5th gear finish for him. I think we're going to coast to finish off that corner. We can instead use the gear die before the jump so that we have a safer jump, and then end in 5th gear like that for our time. A simple turn that we will definitely go flat out on. We should be good. We have 5 clean dice, a 5th gear finish as we go over the jump and into the Y junction in order to finish on the next turn. Can Steve on the other side match that? Let's find out. He has 1 fewer coast die than he started with, and his other 2 coast die have both rolled hazards. It's not enough for him to lose control, and he is able to place down all the dice that he needs. Another 5th gear finish. Final round, most likely, we're going to break down to 3rd gear and then get up to 5th as quickly as we can, and then coast over the start-finish line to record our time. Is there a safer way of doing that? I don't think there is, unless the maths say that boosting to 5 and using a coast die instead of a gear 4 is better. I'm not sure it is. We will soon find out by rolling it flat out. Let's see if we can cross the line. Yes, we can. We get 5 seconds back for our flat out roll and a 5th gear finish. What about Steve on the other side? He wants to do exactly the same. Does he have the dice to do it? Yes, indeed, he can. And we will see what the times are after the first stage. It turns out that Steve finished his side of the course 5 seconds faster than we did, thanks to ending a turn around the outside in 5th when we chose to stop in 4th. But because we earned seconds differently to the NPCs, we managed to claw back 25 seconds, whereas Steve only managed 3, putting us in a strong position, not just against Steve, but against Tanner Faust's time as well. Let's see what the next race brings. We'll have Steve go first, but we can imagine that it's going to be much the same as the other side of the track. He's just going to get all the way up to gear 4. We're going to do the same. We're going to roll those flat out and hope for a good start. We certainly get it. Steve is going to have a couple of hazards on his coast and a hazard on his gear 3. So he can get up to 5th, but he won't get the extra space for having too many hazards. What can we do? We're going to coast out, drop to 2nd, down to 1st, boost into 3rd, and emerge out the other side, all the way in 5th gear. Do we go flat out on those? That will be quite the risk, but all of a sudden, I'm feeling lucky. So let's hope for the best. As we get 3 hazards on gears 1, 3 and a coast die. So we have lost control at some point. Let's work out how best to do that. We can finish in the same space that we initially intended, just in a very different gear. So next round, Steve is looking like the winner of race 2. Will he finish with a better overall time than us? It's quite likely, as he boost up to 5th gear for a 2nd hazard as he finishes with 1 second off of his time for an unused gear 1 die. We're going to spin ourselves back around. We can definitely get past speed limit of 1 there. We want to end our turn in 5th if we can. We'll definitely need a boost, and then gears 2 and 3 will get us there. That was a nice catch. As we roll those flat out and hope for the best, we are looking for a load of focus back to make up for our loss of control. 2 hazards, but a 5th gear finish for us. Steve to go around the hairpin. He only gets to re-roll gear 1. He's got a couple of hazards on his brake die, but he is not going to worry about those. Is he unlucky? On this occasion, he has got a green flag. We can only end in 5th in the space earlier unless we want the distance to try and make things up. But I don't think we do. We will need a boost die in order to get into 5th. So I'm going to roll those flat out, hope for the best. 5 seconds off our time if we manage it. And we don't. We have gotten 3 hazards. We are not looking good for finishing this in a good time. 3 damage tokens. -1 gear, -1 coast, -1 gear. Steve Arpin has a couple of gear dice to reroll. Does he want to boost up to 5th gear? I think he does, as we limp home on the other side of the circuit. We have 2 fewer gears and 1 fewer coast, so we can't use that. We could boost into 3rd gear and then end in 4th. That is not looking too good, as we go flat out just to get things over and done with, I think. A 4th gear finish as we move just 5 spaces down the track. It's looking pretty good for the so-called easy NPC. We want to get as far through the last part of the course as we can. So let's maximize our dice. Break down to first. Well, in fact, we've got fewer gears, haven't we? So let's not maximize our dice. Break down to second, come out in third, and then boost up to fifth. That's the best we can do. Flat out another 5 dice if we manage it, which we don't. We have nearly a hazard Yahtzee. We are going to lose control in third gear. No damage pull for being on a yellow tile, but it is absolutely devastating for our time as we watch Steve Arpin cross the line. Another consistent 5th gear finish as we try our best to make it home. We're going to go 1, coast, coast, let's think, 2, boost 4. We are going to roll those flat out. We are going to now get a flawless set of dice, a 4th gear finish and 5 seconds back. And then we're going to go flat out to finish. And we are going to cross the finish line in 5th gear. Small consolation given the amount of crashes we had to get there. Our time is not looking too good. Bit of an understatement that. Faust, Block and Arpin finished both sides of the course in a faster combined time than I finished just that second stage, meaning that once again I find myself at the bottom of the table, far away from any X-Games gold. But there is still one final chance at redemption, and it's found in the more familiar form of a Rallycross. 2 laps, 1 joker, but who will win? We have randomly determined the grid order and find ourselves slap bang in the middle in 3rd place. In the original course, the stadium seats were used as giant ramps. So this top section is just outside of the LA Coliseum and everything else is in the middle. And we are going to see what action unfolds as Tanner Faust kicks things off. And he gets all the way over here in 4th gear in the drifting space. Steve can do pretty much exactly the same, and he can even push Tanner Faust into the next space. However, at the end of his turn, he is unlucky. A green flag. We are going to do exactly the same as the cars ahead. We have 7 focus on our first turn as we wait to see what happens ahead of us. Brian Deegan is up next, and he joins the back of the train in 4th gear. Ken Block has a choice to make. He could end in 4th gear, but I think he's going to end in 3rd gear instead. He is unlucky. He does draw a damage token. That damage token is a yellow flag, and considering where he is, that is going to have no effect whatsoever. Next round, Tanner Faust is able to get all the way to the next corner, and he has decided that he will sit on that corner, inviting some pushes from the cars behind. Steve Arpin is able to come up behind in 5th gear. However, he is unlucky once again. -1 coast die. We have the option of ducking into the inside of the first corner and then coasting out to come up alongside Steve Arpin. Now, Steve has the defender trait, which means that when being overtaken, an opponent treats the first die as a hazard. So that gear 5 will be a hazard should we place it there. And as such, I think we're going to have to go one by one to secure some of these dice. Of course, so far they roll flawlessly. There is a hazard on the 3. So I should really secure this 4, but I have rolled it, so it is a 4. The 5 would then be a hazard no matter what we do, and we come alongside Steve Arpin in 5th gear. Brian Deegan is going to pull up behind Steve Arpin in 5th gear, but at the end of his turn, he is also unlucky. Everyone with the unlucky trait has drawn something so far, and Brian has drawn a green flag. There can't be many of those left in the damage bag. Finally, Ken Block at the back. He wants to be in 5th gear alongside Brian Deegan, and he can get there with no fuss whatsoever. Next round, Steve Arpin has got turn order. He's lost a coast die already, and Tanner Faust is occupying the corner in front of him. So, first thing he has to do is break down to 2nd gear to push him out of the corner. That will be 1 hazard for his turn. He can then coast around Tanner Faust for another hazard, drop to 1st, boost up to 3rd gear, and accelerate out in 5th gear. He's going to stay on the standard lap as it is the shorter of the two, and he is not unlucky on this turn. We are next, and we also want a run like that. We're going to plan out exactly the same. However, we have an extra coast die, so we ideally want to make use of it. Unfortunately, once again, we'll be overtaking Steve Arpin, so gear 5 will turn into a hazard no matter what we do. Let's go one by one and hope for the best. 2 hazards on our break down to 2nd gear. That is not good for us. Let's roll these supposedly safe dice. We're down to gear 1, that's good. We are going to risk a boost up to 3rd gear. That is good as well. And we have the focus for paying for gear 4, so we will secure 4th gear. We have enough focus to pay for the gear 5 die as well, but no matter what we do, Steve Arpin would turn it into a hazard, so we can't do that. We're going to have to end behind him in 4th gear, but that does give us the option of going into the Joker lap and getting that out of the way. And once again, the unlucky die has rolled a hazard. It must be weighted against these NPCs. Brian Deegan has lost the use of one of his gears. I've never seen so many hazards on a coast die. Ken has drawn -1 coast damage. However, he just ain't care, so instead of losing that coast die, he turns it into a leader die. Finally, we have Tanner Faust at the back, who rolls a clean set of dice. He also has a lot of cars ahead of him to get out the way. So he's going to, first of all, push Ken out of the corner in 1st gear. Ken's going to go on the inside. Tanner can then boost up to 3rd gear alongside him. Now, you would think that he could place gear 4 in the space where Brian Deegan is to push Brian Deegan forward. However, that would push him alongside Steve Arpin in 5th. So you have to respect the overtaking rules, and therefore Brian would have to be in 5th gear. The other alternative is pushing through. If the track ahead of you is blocked by 2 or more cars, you can borrow a space while they are in it. However, to do so, you would have to be at a gear that is higher than the cars that are currently blocking you. And as Tanner does not have an extra boost die to get up to 5th, he can't use the pushing through rules either. So he is stuck here in 3rd gear beside Ken Block, and he will have to wait for a better opportunity to pass. Next round then, Steve Arpin is first. He wants to end in 5th gear somewhere at the bottom of the hill. And I think we are going to peel into the Joker lap. We're going to get it out the way because we're in an ideal position to enter it. And we are hoping to go over the jump in 5th to get some extra distance. A bit of a risk. We will see what happens. We could go flat out, but I think we've learned our lesson from previous events. There is a hazard on the brake die. Gear 2 was fine. Gear 3 is fine. Gear 4 is a hazard. So we are going to pay for Gear 5 to go over the jump. Are we going to pay for the next 2 dice using all of our focus? I think we're going to have to. Coast dice are usually safe, but I don't want to lose control in 5th gear if I can help it, as the damage might be considerable. Brian Deegan is up next. He ends 1 space behind Steve Arpin in 5th gear. Tanner Faust is next, and I think Tanner is going to peel off into the Joker lap. He wants to go over the jump in 5th, but that is currently a hazard. So he's going to use his hot lap trait because no opponents will be overtaken during this turn. So he is able to do that. Unfortunately for him, it doesn't get rid of a hazard. So he will have to engineer a turn that puts him over the jump in 4th. Now put him here in 5th gear just behind us as he looks for an overtake, and we look to keep him behind us at all costs. Ken Block has got a leader die instead of a coast die, but he is able to go over the jump in 5th gear and then come alongside Tanner Faust and indeed push us out of our space and through a speed limit. He has not been unlucky on this turn, but I guess we have been, as we're going to take 2 danger tokens for being in the wrong gear in the wrong space next turn. Let's see what that turn brings, as Steve Arpin is going to take things away as he goes up the stadium seating towards the arches. It should be easy enough. He's going to coast, and that needs a boost die. Into 4th gear, into 3rd gear. He's going to slide all the way down to 1st gear. Not sure that's the best course of action. He could be pushed out of that space easily enough, but then he is a defender, so he does have a strong trait for keeping people behind him. Brian Deegan is next, and he has a couple of gears to reroll. He's going to boost to maintain the speed up the hill. That's 1 hazard for his turn. He's going to very much mirror Steve ahead of him. Down to 1st gear. He can push Steve out of the way. Steve's going to take the inside space. He cannot continue sliding because this is counted as a separate standard space, but there is enough leeway for Brian Deegan to come alongside. He finishes in 1st gear. We are next, and we have 2 danger tokens on our board already. So we would very much like this turn to be as safe as possible, and I think we can do something like that. That will put us pretty much at the top of the hill in 5th gear. We may in fact want to go there in 4th, but the more dice I roll, of course, the harder that is. So I think we're going to ignore these gears, and we're going to stay in the middle of the hill in gear 5. If I roll a single hazard on these 4 dice, I have lost control in a red tile in 5th gear. So we do not want that to happen, and we have not had it happen. That was the best thing that we could have done, and we finish in 5th gear, making it difficult for the cars behind us as we see what Ken can do, and he can end alongside us in 5th gear. Cannot do anything better than that. Tanner Faust then, he has the option of pushing one of us. That will give us a danger token if he pushes us. It would give Ken a danger token if he pushes Ken. I think he is going to make our lives a little more tricky. It would also give him turn order against Ken. Next round then, and we are going first. We have a danger token on our dashboard thanks to Tanner pushing us up the hill, but we also have an opportunity to use the pushing through rules. In the next space we have 2 cars blocking up the track. We are in a higher gear, so we can muscle our way into one of their spaces, dishing out damage at the same time, but we are able to continue our turn through like this, hoping to get up to 5th gear by the end of it. Now, there are a number of things going on. First of all, Steve Arpin's defender trait means that whatever happens, this coast die will be a hazard should we get there. And we also take damage as well as dishing damage out. So we will take 1 damage each, but we've got to get there first. So let's see how we roll. We only have 3 focus. We've got 1 hazard on our dashboard already. Gear 4 is good. Breaking down to 2nd is good. The coast has to be good, which it is. This coast is always going to be a hazard. So we have 1 hazard remaining for our turn. We're going to gamble. We're going to hope that this coast die is good, which it is. And I'd very much like this gear 3 to be good as well, which it is. And I'm going to pay for those last 2 dice to get us up to 5th gear. So we have successfully made it through the front runners, quite literally. However, we've all drawn damage, so gear damage for everybody, and we will have to see whether pushing through was a good idea or not. Tanner Faust is also able to push through on his turn and then come to a stop in 1st gear on the next corner. Once again, everybody gets -1 gear thanks to the damage pulls. Ken Block is going to climb up the hill and then come to a slide behind all of the carnage ahead. He's decided to not push through and then hedge his bets as to where various cars are going to finish. And him being in gear 4 may well be the smartest choice. Let's see what Steve Arpin can do then. He has to push Tanner Faust out of the way. So he can do that in gear 1 if he wants to, but he would then only get up to 3rd gear. If he instead pushes Tanner in 2nd gear, then he can emerge in 4th gear alongside and then overtake us in 5th gear. And he could even slam on the brakes into 3rd gear to coast around the outside like that. Steve is running out of dice that he can roll, but he has managed to put himself in 1st place. Brian Deegan only has the use of 2 gear dice, so he can only get up to 4th alongside Tanner Faust. Next round, and things are looking good for us. We need to break down to 3rd gear, and then we can push Steve Arpin out of the way. And we can do that twice so that he gives us some space down the hill. We can come alongside him in 4th. That would turn that die into a hazard. So we'll have to think about how we get through this turn. This might be a race of survival rather than speed. So let's go 1 by 1, see how far we get. We are good to break down through the corner and to coast through. So this gear 4, no matter what it is a hazard. And no matter what we roll on gear 5, we are good to end in 5th gear. Brian is going to drop to 2nd gear on the corner and then boost up to 4th alongside Steve Arpin. Ken can go through both corners and end up behind Steve Arpin in 4th. He can't push Steve because Steve is not in the right gear to come alongside us. Steve can do nothing because he doesn't have the boost die to get up to 5th gear to overtake us. So he is going to miss out on a turn there. And Tanner Faust is just going to coast up behind Ken Block and wait for an opening. In order to maintain 5th gear, we need to use a brake die along with our coast die. We can then drop to 4th and use our other brake die to obey the speed limit in 2nd. We can then coast, 3rd, boost 5th. We have 1 gear damage, so we can't use 1st gear. And we're going to see how far we get. Although I do like a focus pull. So let's risk going flat out. 2 hazards on gears 2 and 3. We have made it. And we are looking set to redeem ourselves as we go into the next lap of this Rallycross event. Brian Deegan is only able to get to 4th gear at the bottom of the hill, thanks to his gear damage. Ken Block can easily overtake Steve Arpin on the way downhill, and he can also overtake Brian Deegan into the 1st corner, and so he is now only a couple of spaces behind us in 2nd gear. Steve Arpin is only able to get to 5th alongside Brian Deegan. Tanner Faust can get up to 5th gear. He does have the option of pushing either car ahead of him out the way, but that will be bad for the next turn, so he's not going to do that. We are going to want to get away from all of this as fast as we can, and another successful flat out roll puts us over here in 5th gear. Steve Arpin is able to break down to second gear and then push Ken just a single space forward. He does have the option of pushing him again in gear 3, but given the amount of damage he has taken, he has decided not to do that. However, we do have to check if he is unlucky. Steve Arpin gets a yellow flag. There is no overtaking on these tiles. Tanner Faust is only able to come alongside Brian Deegan in 4th. Brian is only able to slide up to the back of Steve Arpin in 4th. He also takes damage for being unlucky. He takes a yellow flag, as if there weren't enough already. And then Ken Block is able to run away, still only managed to take 1 damage token, and that only turned a coast die into a leader die. He can get all the way up to 4th gear in the space behind us. It is very much a race between me and Ken as we go into 2nd gear around the outside of this corner. We have gear damage, so we can only go up to 5th in this space. We have lots of focus to secure dice, so let's hope we don't have to spend too many of them. And we're going to have to spend some of them to secure these remaining dice. We're going to finish in 5th gear. Ken Block has rolled a lovely set of dice and he is able to overtake us. So he is 1 space ahead in 5th gear. Brian Deegan is able to push Steve Arpin out of the corner and get up to 4th gear just after the finish line. Tanner Faust is able to get up to 5th gear in the space behind Brian Deegan, which means all Steve Arpin can do is turn over his gear marker and wait for the next turn. Ken Block is able to get up to the middle of the hill, and hopefully so are we. We are going to risk a flat out roll, and we get 2 hazards on gears 4 and 5, not enough to lose control. Tanner Faust is going to try and end in as high a gear as he can, and he is able to get all the way through the 1st corner towards the 2nd. Brian Deegan wants to match that. Best he can get is 4th in the space behind. Steve Arpin can only get up to 4th gear at the start of the 1st corner. Next round, Ken Block to go first. He has avoided all of the damage in this race, and he has not been as unlucky as the rest of them. He has the opportunity to pull out a lead. He is going to drop to 4th, break down to 2nd, and then coast through, block up the corner in 3rd gear. And that will give us something to think about as we decide where we want to end our turn. We can start that turn by going into 4th and coasting through, dropping to 2nd. So we are going to push Ken in 3rd and then boost up to 5th. And we have loads of focus tokens. So we are going to roll 1 by 1 and see what happens. We are good so far. We are still good. Pushing Ken in 3rd is good. And we could have gone flat out here. Just the 1 hazard on 5th gear. Tanner Faust is able to continue to get 5th gear as he carries on the standard lap, having already done his joker. Brian Deegan is also consistent. He gets into 4th gear and he wants to peel off into the joker lap. And finally, Steve Arpin is going to finish in 1st gear on the corner. Next round, and all we need to do is keep Ken behind us. And I think a turn like that is the smartest thing to do. And we're going to end in 5th there. That will be turn order for being on the inside on the next corner. We're going 1 by 1. There is a hazard on the coast die and a hazard on a brake. So we are going to risk this coast and then chicken out and pay for the rest. Tanner Faust is able to maintain 5th gear once more. Brian Deegan is going on to the joker lap, and the best he can do is end in the space before the jump in 3rd gear. We can now see what Ken can do behind us. Hopefully not very much. He finishes alongside us in 5th. It may not look like it, but the next actual corner space is at first corner. We still have turn order against him. And Steve Arpin goes into the Joker lap and finishes in 2nd gear. Next round, we are able to break down to 2nd gear and then come out into gear 5. However, thanks to gear damage that we took for pushing through all the way at the top of the course, we do not have the dice to get across the finish line for a win. So, no matter what we do, we are hoping that Ken does worse. I'm going to go flat out and see what happens. We get 1 hazard. So we do finish in 5th gear, 1 space before the finish line, and we hope that Ken Block cannot overtake us. But with a clean set of dice, he is able to use all of them to cross the finish line in 5th gear, and he will take the victory. We will take 2nd place, and it seems quite certain that Tanner Faust will finish in 3rd. A medal at last, not as shiny as it could have been, but I can only blame myself. The decision to push through may have gotten me to the front of the pack, but that 1 gear damage allowed Ken to bide his time, pick his way through the field from the back and strike when it mattered most. It's gold to Block, bronze to Faust and a new engine for Steve Arpin. Who would have predicted that last to first success from Ken Block? Perhaps staying out of trouble is the way to go, and efforts to push each other around only guarantee a poor result and a damaged car. While you look into racing strategy in Rallycross, I'll go back to the basics and relearn when to go flat out and when not to. The Rallymankhana rules are designed to let you play around with what Rallyman is capable of, providing we allow the cars to move a little differently in an unusual environment. Hopefully they'll serve as a springboard for hosting your own outlandish events, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with. Donutting around hay bales, handbrakes and 180-degree turns, jumping where no Rallyman car has jumped before. We haven't scratched the surface of what is possible next time the Coliseum plays host to a Gymkhana event. And that has been our Rallyman X-Games. Whatever you end up doing, remember to Hoon responsibly, drive sideways whenever you can, and come out the other side of the arena with a huge pile of focus tokens.